Hi and welcome to another video on UiPath with me, Jeppe. In this one we're taking a look at apps, and I've done that before in the very first video that I posted on YouTube back in November of 2020. Apps was the topic and it was not a very good video, so we'll do a new one. In fact, this is going to be a multi-part series. If it's going to be 2 or 3 or 4 parts, I'm not sure yet. But in this first one we're taking a look at the design elements. How do you lay out the user interface elements of your app? As always, before we get started, please take time to subscribe to my channel. And also, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. I still don't have many subscribers, so I usually do have time to answer the questions. But let's get to it. So before getting technical, I think it's fair to ask, what is UiPath Apps? Well, UiPath Apps, first of all, have nothing to do with apps. And I mean that in the sense that it's not an app for your smartphone. It's an application, and I wish they called it UiPath applications instead of apps, because this is just a new way of applying the processes that you have inside of your company. It's a new application of those processes. So by calling it apps, I'm sure a lot of managers out there will say, oh, can I get an app for my smartphone? No, you can't. It has nothing to do with apps in that traditional sense. It's a new application. And the good thing is, it's a no-code development platform. So you can do this without programming a single line of any kind of code. No JavaScript, no VB, no C#. It's all drag and drop. And kudos to the developers at UiPath because they have really come a long way in a short time. And I can't wait to see what will happen in the future. And finally, it builds on existing processes. You cannot build an app if you don't have a process that is published and accessible on your orchestrator. It simply doesn't make sense because what apps are user interfaces that talk to the processes that you already have published. You can send requests to the processes, you can get responses back with data in them, and in that sense you can, instead of scheduling processes in Orchestrator with triggers and stuff like that, you can let your users activate the processes by exposing a user interface that looks like a traditional Windows application or web application. And in that sense it's really, really strong. But it's not a mobile app, it's no-code development, and it builds on processes that you already have. So let's start looking at the tool. Okay, so I'm inside my cloud platform and I've selected the apps button over here, and that lets me create a new app by clicking up here in the upper right, and I'll create a new app called Jeppe's App and click create. And that'll take us into the Design Studio. And in here we have 3 main elements. We have over here on the left, we have sort of a project explorer, whatever you want to call it, kind of like how we know it from UiPath Studio. In the middle we have a design surface, and on the right we have some properties, depending on what is selected inside the design surface or in the project tree over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the layout that is in our main page. So now we just have a page because we want to start out with the simple stuff. If I have a page, that is simply a container for controls. But let's just take a look at the properties pane over here. We have a general tab, and for a page element, it simply holds a description, and we can just say, this is Jeppe's app. Doesn't make much of a difference, it's just a property. In the events tab, we can see that when this page is loaded, we can apply a rule to the page. We want something to happen when the page is loaded, and we'll get back to that a little bit later. And then we have the style tab, and that has to do with how things look. And inside this style tab, we have all kinds of options. Vertical versus horizontal alignment of things. With these buttons, we can set the background color, we can set the border, padding, margins, all kinds of stuff that if you've done any kind of maybe HTML development or web development, you know some of these things. But this basically just decides how things look. And I want you to take note of this because these properties, to an extent at least, are the same for most user interface elements. So let's try and add a new control to this page. We'll just select a button and drag it in and place it on the page. We'll select another button and drag it in and place it on the page. And if we now select the page again and look at the style, the layout was a vertical layout. And if we do a horizontal instead, we can see that the buttons will be placed next to each other. We can also decide the alignment and all of that. And we can, of course, set the background color of the page and all of those things. But right now, they are stacked on top of each other in a vertical layout. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us in a place where we don't have much flexibility in the way of designing our user interface, because all we can do is just add new controls, and if I add a date picker, it'll go below the buttons, and if I add another switch, it'll go below the date picker, and it'll just be a stack of controls, and we don't want that. Let me just delete some of these things again. So what we can do is we can add another type of control to this page, and that is a type of control that is called a container control. And that is in the group of controls called containers. There are different kinds, and we'll go through all of them. And we'll drag in a container control. And we can see what that is. It's simply a box, and we can then take these two buttons and drag them into that box. And if I click that box, take a look at the style elements over here, and take a look at what happens when I click the page instead of the container. These style elements are almost the same. So inside of the box, we can set some of the properties that we before set on the page level, we can set at the container level. So for example, if we want these buttons to be in a horizontal layout, we can do that, but the page is still a vertical layout. So if I add another control, the date picker, it'll now be below the container that contains the buttons, because this is part of the vertical layout. So this gives us some flexibility as far as how do we place things on the page, and that can be very nice. It's still not quite enough though. We want more flexibility. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another control, and that's called a container layout. And if I add that to my page, things will start to happen. What this is a container with a container inside of it. But you have the option of adding more of these inner containers to this outer container. And I can do that by just clicking the plus over here. And I can then resize this container in whatever way I want. I could add another container below it, and I could resize that to be the full width of the page. And this gives us these containers to play with. And inside those containers, I can now place whatever I want. So let me just kind of modify my layout a little bit here. There we go. This is kind of what I want. I'll make this a little smaller and then move these up a bit. Okay, so what I can do now is I can take these buttons that I had before and I can drag them into this container down here. And this container I'm going to call CT menu, right? And inside of this container I can do all kinds of stuff. You know, I'll just resize it a little bit. And I can say to the buttons now, I want these buttons to be 100% of the container that they live inside of. And I can see that they're not exactly centered inside of this container. Let's see if we can change that. We could by selecting the container and then selecting center over here. We could select one of the buttons either by clicking it here or by clicking over in the project tree, and we can right click and say duplicate, and it'll create another button. So now we have 3 buttons in our menu sort of structure over here. In the top container, I also want to add some stuff. That'll be a display control, and that'll simply be a label. We go to the general tab of that label and type in UiPath App. We'll select the container it lives within, and we'll click center horizontally, center vertically. Oh, sorry, we need to also center this one. There we go. So now we have that in the center, and now we can format the font, and we can say that we just want it to be a lot bigger than what it is now. There we go. So now we have sort of a title bar, we have a menu bar over here on the left. We also have sort of some garbage up here, and that's the old container that we had to begin with. So let's just right click and delete that, and now it's looking a little bit better again. We can also say that we want this to be a little bit bigger. So now we have something that kind of looks like what a website would look like in the 90s. Okay, let's add a little bit more details to these things. The buttons over here, let's set some properties for those. We'll select the first button, and actually I like to select things over here in the project tree, because sometimes when you select a button or something that is inside another container, you get the container selected instead of the button itself. So I like to make sure that I click over here on the left on the exact element that I want to work with. So button 1, if I click that, I can set some properties. I could set the name of it, btn page 1. I like to set those properties. I'll go to the general tab and I'll set the text for the button to be page 1. I'll do the same for the next button. So when I click one of these buttons, I want something to show inside of the main content area here. So this container right here, that's called container 4 right now, we will call that ct_content. And this is where the real fun begins, because now we can make use of the third and final type of container control, and that is the page container. I insert a page container into this container, and now what we'll do is we'll collapse all of this stuff over here, so we just see the main page, and then we'll add a few more pages. We'll add page 1, page 2, and page 3. And page 1, we'll just do a little bit of styling on that. We'll make it kind of blue. Page 2, we'll do a little bit of styling on that as well. We'll make that kind of green. And the final page, we will make whatever this color is. Right? So now we have 3 pages and a main page. So when we click page 1, page 2, or page 3, we want those pages to be shown inside of our page container. And how do we do that? Well, at the page container level, one thing we can do is, as the default page, we can set page 1 to be the one being displayed. So we just take from the controls group here in this resources panel, we drag page 1 over to the page field here, and now we can see that that blue color is being shown. So we might want to go into the styling tab of the page container and say that the height we want at least, let's say 500 pixels. That is too big for this container that is contained within, so we'll make that a little bit bigger as well. And we'll also resize the container that has the menu. So now we can see page 1 inside the page container. And what we can do is, for these 3 buttons, we can set some events or some rules. So for page 3, we'll go backwards, just because we can. We'll create a new rule, and what we want to have happen now is we want to open a page. And we get this little editor here. What page do we want to open? When we click the field, again, we get this controls group in a resources panel. And we can say, well, we want page 3 to be the page to be opened. Then we have a few other options here. We'll skip those for now. But we'll want to set the final option down here, open in page container. Which page container do we want it to open in? Well, we only have one page container control in our project so far. That is in the main page. So I'll drag this page container into this field, and that doesn't work. And I can keep doing this all day. It's not going to happen. But I can double click it, and that works. So a little something for the developers at UiPath there. So we'll click button 2 over here. Do exactly the same thing. Go to the Events tab, create a rule, open a page, select which page do we want to open. We want to open page 2, and we want to open it in the page container called page container in our main page. And the same thing for button 1. Open page 1 and do it in the page container in our main page. So now we basically have the main layout, structure, and navigation of our application made out. So what we can do now before we finish this video is we can do a preview of this app. What that'll do is it'll open a new tab in our browser where it loads this app into. And here is the app. We have UiPath App with the header. We have the main content area here in the middle, and we have our menu out here on the left. And if I click page 2, lo and behold, page 2 loads in the content area here, and page 3, we switch to page 3 and go back to page 1. So this is how you can do some of the layout functions in UiPath Studio. There are lots more properties, of course, if we close this window and look at each of the buttons and how you can style them and all of that. But I'll leave that up to you to play around with. We have a simple framework now for building the rest of our application, and we'll do that in the coming videos. If you like it, and if you want to see the next video about UiPath apps, make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit the little notification bell, and you're welcome to share this video with your colleagues as well. So stay safe, see you in the next one. Thank you.